The poor son of a bitch who burned alive because Richard threw some gasoline into his car is one that Richard claimed to be his second murder. Now, the cops never found evidence this actually happened, and he was never charged for burning somebody alive. But Richard asserted it was his second murder. Now, HBO, they show you evidence that this actually happened with a headline in the news from New Jersey City that shows you that a man was burned alive. Now remember, HBO's priority isn't educating you. Its first priority is making money by entertaining you.
One night in a bar, a loudmouth made the mistake of insulting the 18-year-old Kuklinski in front of people.
The irony with this is, if there was anybody on the planet who was ever a loudmouth, it was this asshole, Richard Kuklinski, who does nothing but bombastically brag and act like he's the toughest guy on the planet or who ever lived. Well, HBO kisses his ass for money. But let's continue.
A couple of hours later, the Iceman saw his chance to get even.
I come out of this bar.
Wait, pause. Don't worry. I'll start it over for him. I'm at a disadvantage here. You see, HBO, determined to sell Iceman as the most dangerous thing of all time, while juxtaposing it with his tragic life, plays creepy music to enhance his charisma. Maybe this'll work? I don't know.
Bar, and I see him sleeping in his car. It's like, I got you, little sucker, now I got you. I'm gonna light you a fire. And I did. I got myself a bottle, some gasoline, and I threw it in the car with him.
So when Rich elaborates further on page 32 of Philip Carlo, this loudmouth insults Rich by calling him a cheater at pool, and then a dumb Pollock, a frequent insult in the book because everybody seems to know Richard's ethnicity, and they all hate Pollocks for some reason. Alright, okay. So he burns this guy alive while sleeping in his car and casually walks away. Nobody comes outside to the screams and notices the 6'5" Pollock walking casually away like in a Hollywood film. It's weird, but okay. Cops could never actually find evidence this happened, as I showed you earlier. But HBO could. They show you a headline while it's happening. It happened at Club International in New Jersey City. These cops must be dumb. Except, wait a second. The book says it happened at a bar named Danny's. That's not the same bar. So, the HBO guys, they must have been just showing you a bullshit headline. Because Richard Kuklinski contradicted himself and said, no, it wasn't that place. It was this bar where nobody could find this event ever happening. I have a feeling you wouldn't be able to find the bar either if you looked that it never existed. But even if it did, there was no evidence that he ever killed anybody there. The cops weren't able to find any, if they even found evidence of that bar existing. Next, Richie allegedly leads a gang called the Coming Up Roses. They terrorize New Jersey with their bats and gun and brawling, and they're the most dangerous gang around, all the while completely eluding even slight media attention. But they did gain mob attention, allegedly. The DeCalvacanti mob family, otherwise known as the New Jersey crime family. They're basically the Sopranos. They have the power and position and location of the Sopranos on television, the Sopranos obviously being fictional. And specifically, Rich and his gang gained the attention of a guy named Carmine Genovese. Now, this Carmine Genovese, who there's no evidence ever existed, is supposed to be a boss with the New Jersey crime family, either a soldier or a capo. But you can tell Richard made him up entirely. There's no evidence, of course, that the figure ever existed. Couldn't find anything in any papers anywhere. And he's written like some kind of comical Italian stereotype of a mobster. This is where Rich could have used a creative writing instructor to fix these things. However outlandish, I don't think he was a terrible storyteller. But yeah, they call this guy Carmine the Meatball. Now, Carmine decides he's going to hire Roy and his 18-year-old punk friends in his Coming Up Roses gang as contract killers. This is ridiculous because the mob had their own men to do kills. In the mob, there are killers and there are earners, and sometimes both killers and earners. The killers who can't earn have to earn their place somehow, and so they do so by killing. And they do it for free, since they are given lucrative rackets in return, to manage with the expectation of at least not completely fucking it up. Now, the exceptions would be Burke and Roy. They use outsiders, but they still had to be inner members of their crew. So Carmine the Meatball would have no reason to trust a bunch of kids to keep their mouths shut, not tell the cops if they screw up or flip. And it's important to remember that if they don't kill this enemy effectively, and they have no training, then if the enemy learns that someone just tried to kill him, he's liable to, at best, flee, try to hit back, or become an informant. So Richard's story of how he and a bunch of kids became top hitmen over this fictional Meatball's own crew should be more proficient at killing and more experienced at it. That sounds like a bunch of nonsense. One of the first things Richard needed help with when he thought up these stories was the dialogue. So they come in, they're invited to Carmine Genovese, the Meatball's home. He's a little short, round guy with a round head that looks like a meatball, I'm assuming. And he's making meat gravy sauce. Because why would the meatball make something whose recipe doesn't emphasize meat? Duh. And this is his dialogue. I'm hearing all the time about you, and I like what I hear. I got a piece of work for you. You do this good, I'll make sure you earn big. This guy in Lincoln Park, here's his address and his picture. He's a problem. He's got his head up his ass. He's got to go. You do a good job, I make sure you earn. Capiche? Every Italian that he meets says capiche. I did everything for you already. Just finish the work. He's got to go. Understand? Yeah, absolutely, Richard said. Good. This got to happen quick. Understand? Anything goes wrong, you call me. We own the cops here, okay? Honestly, that's a little bit overblown. The mob never completely owned a whole precinct of cops. Roy had 5 on his list of rogue cops. It was usually a lot more complicated than that. There were good cops, and then they had some bad rogue cops within them. So off the coming of roses go. And of course, the guy who was supposed to shoot the target, he can't do it. He's just not strong-willed enough. So Richard takes over, and he easily shoots him. Because basically this whole book is Richard sucking himself off. And everybody looks in awe when he just easily shoots this guy. And they're like, cool as a fucking cucumber. Man, you're cold like ice. Even though that's a little coincidental because his Iceman name wouldn't come about for like another 35 years.
Genovese graduates the young Kuklinski from theft to murder.
In the book, Genovese, the Meatball Boss, first has Kuklinski immediately murder, but that seemed too far-fetched. So one of the ways you know this I Live with a Killer documentary isn't really a documentary, but just a money grab, acting in bad faith, is it says he stole for the Meatball Boss first, and then graduated him to murder, because that sounds more convincing. So they return to the Meatball Boss, who's impressed, and he should be, as well as he should be impressed with himself, because he stupidly just had a bunch of kids go and do this. Yeah, kids don't talk. Bravo, you son of a bitches! Yeah, this is great literature. Very convincing. So he starts giving the crew, should I say, the gang of punks that he's just found, a lot of work, rather than giving that work to his own men. And they start hijacking. And they manage during their hijacking to steal $2 million in gold and money. $1 million goes to their boss, and they split up $200,000 apiece. Now that story's a little fishy. Wow, Rich, you were only 19, and in 1954, you and a gang of your stooges managed the third biggest hijacking in American history at that point? $2 million? And nobody even knows about it? That's how good you were? It isn't listed in any news articles. You don't tell lies, because you seem so fucking honest. I mean, when do profit, narcissistic, attention-starved serial killers lie? Later, our meatball boss orders Rich to do a hit on another boss. At a young age still, he's like in his early 20s, all by himself, confident Rich will be able to get through his bodyguards, because Rich is somehow almost supernatural. And our meatball boss also knows that these guys will retaliate if Rich fails, but of course Rich isn't going to fail because he's the Punisher times 2. Rich can't fail. And if you're a second grader, this should start to sound far-fetched. So Rich gets through the bodyguards, and he kills the nephew as well of this other boss who's not named because he's not real, as part of the mob hit. Now, you're not supposed to kill extra people if you don't have to, just the hit itself, but mob rules don't apply when it comes to Rich. After all, he's the one telling the story. In addition, since Meatball Boss had another boss whacked, that means he must at least be a capo, and they were usually documented because there weren't that many of them. But for some reason, this guy's not documented maybe because he's fictional. So the next two people are real. Anthony Agrilla and Paul Rothenberg. Now, aside from appearing in Murder Machine, I researched them extensively for my own book through old newspaper articles. It's 1972, and Rich is ambitious. Despite finding porn sleazy, Rich decides to invest in it. So he meets up with his buddy Agrilla, who for some reason immediately offers to give Rich however much he wants in porn tapes as a loan to start his own business without any collateral. Rich decides, okay, God, this guy's stupid, and borrows $75,000 in porn tapes, or $509,000 in 2022 cash. What immediately should indicate to anyone with a brain that this is all bullshit is that Agrilla and his partner Rothenberg are being squeezed, and Nino and Roy would have seen throwing that much money in porn reels at some guy with no collateral or reason to trust him as basically stealing from them. And that was a lot of money to them. According to news accounts, these two guys and their little team worked about 16 hours a day and made $100,000 a month. Yet Agrilla's going to let Richard rack up a debt of $75,000, according to him, in porn reels. So that's not even just money. Those are porn reels. Those are harder to get a hold of than cash. And they have to worry about being raided any time now because it was only a semi-legitimate business. Sorry, Rich. Usually professional criminals aren't as credulous as HBO audience members. Wait, I didn't mean that. Didn't mean to sound skeptical of St. Richard here. I wasn't suggesting that his stories are almost complete fabrications. Hey, I'm not looking to get the cult of Kuklinski to get on their horses and ride out to do battle for the dignity of the Iceman and his honesty. Kuklinski jihadists are among the most the most aggressive in the world. What I meant to say was, but of course Rich couldn't be making bullshit up. Sociopaths don't lie. Now Rich further describes what both Rothenberg and Agrilla look like. That's good because they're not described in Murder Machine. And I can't confirm whether Rich's description of Agrilla is wrong or right, but when he starts describing Rothenberg, whom I do know what he looks like because I have an image from a newspaper, I am writing a book after all on DeMeo, it describes him as stocky with a potato-like nose. Rich? I know it's been a long time, but Rothenberg was slender and had sharp features. If you're watching the visuals, you can see Rothenberg above, and that statement's contradicted. But oh well, maybe he's confusing Rothenberg with the troll in the movie Labyrinth, or whatever the fuck Hoggle is supposed to be. Now here's where the story gets interesting, and if I didn't know any better, it was strong evidence in itself that Rich didn't know DeMeo or his crew. Maybe encountered him once in the Gemini Lounge, as Dominic said, but otherwise he really didn't know him, and that he was never extorted by Roy as a porn bootlegger, or if he was, didn't happen even slightly in the way he describes. First, Carlo claims Rich said he was dismissive of Agrilla and Rothenberg, and that he wasn't going to pay any faster. He gave him some payments, but he wasn't going to prioritize it. So Roy hears, and he comes bristling in, and he makes some threats to Kuklinski, but realizes this man's just too dangerous for him. If even though Roy usually carried a gun with him, according to sources available, especially if he's going to go and try to intimidate somebody. So Roy leaves and he gets his crew. They come back, then Roy pistol whips Kuklinski and they all gang up on him. Kuklinski doesn't fight back because he realizes there are just too many of them, and if he shrugged them off with his superpowers that his followers believe he has, Roy, well, he was a made guy and he might have had him killed. Even Kuklinski can only absorb so many bullets. But here's something that's odd. Name's Joseph Guelmo, a.k.a. Dracula, Joey Testa, Anthony Center, and Henry Borelli. Okay, except that Dracula didn't join the crew until 1977. He committed bank robbery in 1970, got arrested, slowed the trial down by cutting his wrists, and was stuck in prison and a mental ward until getting out around 1976. That's substantiated by both Capici and Murder Machine, Albert DeMeo, Dracula's own criminal record, which I show in my DeMeo series episode 8, and it's also in news accounts and case accounts. Furthermore, Rich says that they had prolonged contact because Roy drove back and invited Rich along, and he and Dracula hung out together. And Dracula also hangs out with them around this time in the Anthony Bruno book. Again, Dracula couldn't have. He was in prison. And even more odd, Rich describes Dracula as having that white mane hair that he's famous for, looking like Bela Lugosi, except, if you look at the newspaper account I provided above, if you're watching the visuals, Dracula had dark hair in the early 70s. He didn't go white till a few years later. Rich, it's almost like you didn't meet Dracula.